Riddle me this, cinema drunks. Who's the drunkest bat in the Batcave?
Oh, that would have to be Ben Affleck.
Oh, you are correct. Welcome to Cinema Gulp.
And this is our review of the Batman.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
It's certainly becoming that comic book world now where like you every once in a while you get a different iteration of Batman and people are like, oh, are you getting sick of Batman? Are you getting sick of Spider-Man? Well, whatever. But now with Batman, you get a different fucking person playing him and a different take on it. So
I don't know how many iterations of Batman we've had at this point, but we're living in a world now where comic book movies, this is what the new norm is, that we get all these different variations at the same time. You don't necessarily have to wait for the passing of the torch where this series is completed before you start the next one. I feel like we're in the midst of like 3 different Batman series essentially right now. So as a new iteration of Batman, I think this one is definitely one of the most unique ones. And I appreciate it a lot for how different it is from all the other ones that we've seen. There's definitely still some similarities to certain ones. I appreciate this film for it taking those chances to be different and to also break some of the norms of typical comic book movies. It's not like it's the first one to do it, but its take, how serious it is and how grounded it is, pushes the boundaries a little bit for what we've even seen. I mean, we've all credited the Nolan series and other films like Logan and whatnot along the way to be that more serious, realistic, grounded take on the superhero genre. But I kind of feel like this one is now finally the most grounded superhero movie we've gotten.
This movie is bold. This movie, dude, this is a comic book movie called Batman, typically designed to do what, John? Sell toys, right? Kids are not going to like this movie. They're not going to want to sit through this movie. They're not going to want to see it. And if they did sit through it with their father, they're not going to be, Daddy, what is this? What is happening? Like, so I love the bold direction because this is a studio finally saying like, okay, fuck it. Like, let's give the guy a second, or let's give this filmmaker like his own voice. It definitely has more in common with 2019's Joker than it does with probably any other iteration of Batman. And there's a lot of things that if we did a spoiler thing, we could talk about as to why, like certain directions that past characters end up taking and, you know, the way some of the mythos pans out and stuff like that. But I don't know. I found it exhilarating. I had a blast watching it with you last night in the theater. It's very long, and I will say it feels its length, where sometimes movies this long don't feel it. I feel like it didn't really know when it wanted to wrap up or how to wrap up, and I do have issues with that third act, you know, but...
You use the word exhilarating. And that was what the film was lacking for me. The film did not get my blood pumping really at all. I think I mentioned to you that it finally did in the third act, which I know the third act has its issues, but there was some elements of how the third act was playing out that connected to the real world and things we see in the news and things today that actually kind of was frightening while watching it. That's one of the aspects. So the movie wasn't exhilarating for me. The movie wasn't very exciting for me, but I really appreciated the other elements that it did bring of like the mystery, the kind of thriller aspect, a little bit of horror aspect. I definitely felt like I got some shades of Let Me In, you know, one of Reeves' other films, in some of the cinematography and the kind of the long takes and people lingering in the shadows. I mean, I know it's a Batman story. You're going to get that no matter what, but the way that he took his time with some of those scenes, and the movie is a little too long, and it's kind of within certain scenes. I think they could have just tightened up the scenes. They didn't have to cut out a subplot or anything, in my opinion, but just maybe tighten up some of the moments of the film.
I don't want any plot points gone or story beats gone, but there's moments, John. There's lots of lingering moments where Batman takes forever to either like show himself or he's walking through a crime scene, which is great. dude, this is Batman solving crimes as a detective, which is amazing. But sometimes those scenes linger too long, and I feel like I don't think you could have cut it down like by a half an hour, but you could have cut it down by maybe 10 minutes.
The only scenes that where he lingered too long that I would say don't cut are the Zoe Kravitz walking through the club scenes. My God, I could watch a 2-hour movie of her strutting her stuff through that club.
You know, that's one of the biggest strengths of this movie is probably the relationship of those two. Like we've seen Batman movies before where Catwoman's a presence, and I thought Anne Hathaway was great. She had a small role, not very pivotal, and like there was not too many scenes between the two of them. But like, and then you have your Keaton one with Michelle Pfeiffer, and she's kind of the iconic one that has to be beat.
In this film, the movie is aptly named The Batman because the focus is clearly on him throughout the film. And that was another thing I appreciated, that, you know, there are other films, I think, like Batman Begins, that does a good job of focusing on Batman and Bruce Wayne. But this is another one that really just allowed us to learn a lot about Batman himself, a little less about Bruce Wayne. I mean, they're one of the same.
So you're all you're doing is you're not, because there's very, you know, no spoilers. There's not a lot of Bruce Wayne in this movie, but you're not really, as a viewer, you're not missing much because he is who he's the guy that you're seeing throughout the movie. You're learning who he is. You're just not learning who he wants Gotham to see him as. And I'm guessing that the sequel is going to be more of him like figuring out, hey, I got to put on a persona. He comes across as such a pussy. Like he's always got the locks, like he looks like Edward. You know, he's back to being Edward when he's Bruce Wayne. He looks like he looks like a hole through his chest.
Version of Tobey Maguire.
Yeah. He's so imposing when he's Batman, and he just looks like this little shit, you know, when he's Bruce Wayne. So maybe that's why people don't bat an eye about it. No pun intended.
I did really like the look of the costume and his look as Batman.
It's very practical without being tactical, like the Nolan one. Yeah, the look of Gotham is awesome because it's sludgy and it's gross, and it's kind of it doesn't have the fantastical of like a Burton thing, and it doesn't have the, hey, we're in Chicago look of Nolan. So it kind of has its own thing. And to me, it's the most graphic novel year one look of Batman ever. And so much of this movie, even though it's supposed to be his second year, it feels so much like Batman year one. But the city looks grimy and gross. And I love how it introduces the city with rain and that it's on Halloween. That's just perfect.
The city, I do think it's a point that the filmmaker is making, but the city wears on you. The look of the darkness and the rain that never lets up at any point of the movie, pretty much, even to a water-soaked finale. The movie is like, it just makes you kind of uncomfortable being stuck in that environment for so long and never really seeing the sun or feeling like you could dry off. Reeves has done that before. There's elements of
Cloverfield, even Cloverfield a little bit.
Yeah, even Cloverfield. All of his movies. There's his cinematography likes those dark blacks, and
he uses like blacks to kind of mask the mystery that you're supposed to be seeing. You know, and I thought he used that good in this. He did that, you know, I mean, Cloverfield was his first major movie, and he did that by masking what you're supposed to be following in that movie. Look, we'll get it out of the way right now. None of the villains in this movie are going to be as memorable as Heath Ledger's Joker. Okay, we're done with that. Okay, now we can talk about the villain. Well,
the Riddler specifically,
Paul Dano.
He's integral, but you don't get a ton of him specifically, but his presence is always felt throughout the movie, and you know the fact that he's pulling the strings on most of this. But you don't get a ton of actually Paul Dano, you know, his performance.
His screen time is very much like John Doe, where it's like like you said, his presence is everything they're trying to figure out, but you don't see him that much. Yeah.
And you know, you making the comparison to John Doe, you know, the villain of Seven, this movie borrows, a bit from Seven in its look and feel and kind of the presentation of this thriller noir mystery, murder mystery. There are people being murdered in gruesome ways, and that was another issue I had with this movie. We talked about was the tone of this movie. To me, feels like a hard R movie that should have some really impactful moments that you'll never forget, impactful, twisted, fuck up your psyche kind of moments. And it doesn't have any of that, in my opinion. It's a neutered version of that kind of movie, and it's because of the rating. It's a PG-13 movie. They need to sell these comic movies as PG-13. It's rare they actually go R. If it had been, we would have got probably a lot of that, because I know Matt Reeves is capable of it. Let Me In is filled with moments that are shocking and memorable to me. So that was kind of where I felt a little bit of the lack of the excitement that for this movie was for me, was those moments that are supposed to feel intense and impactful and frightening didn't quite hit for me because it was a PG-13 neutered version of them.
I feel like this movie should have been R, John, based on exactly what I said earlier on. Kids aren't going to see it. It's not going to sell toys. Adults are going to go see it, and it's already showing like 18 to our age are watching it. That's where your money's coming from. It might as well have just been rated R. It's like, because that way you can go the full 9. I know what you're saying. And when you told me that last night, I thought about it when I got home, and I'm like, I agree with you. But I also know that like, that's how the Dark Knight kind of played out too. Is like, it worked on intensity and like mystery, and it worked on a lot of other facets other than just like watching. So, like, I mean, we know that like the Joker gives 2 guys like broken pool cues to like kill each other with, which is gnarly, but we don't see it. So that's a neutered version as well, like
it is. They're all neutered. Every single Batman,
for sure.
I guess
for sure.
Ben Affleck stuff where they tried to push boundaries, but for a movie with as much violence as there is, none of it ever felt impactful at any point. And I'd say the Nolan ones still can when they need to be.
And a lot of that has to do with just direction, edits, sound design, score, all hitting you at the same moments. Because those two movies, Dark Knight and this one, they parallel each other in a lot of ways, especially towards the end. Like, what is the guy up to? What's this dilemma that's happened? Like, so much of it has to do with what happens in post. Like, how do they build up that tension that the director and the actors and everybody captured? Like, can you make it work? And for me, they did. I still felt let down a little bit when we got to the final action scene of this movie after the whole Arkham. What did you do? I was like, oh my God, this is 7. This is fucking 7. Something crazy is going to happen. And it was just a comic book thing that happened. It was still kind of crazy, but I was expecting something darker to happen. Let's talk about Zoe Kravitz.
I was very impressed with Zoe Kravitz. I don't know what other movies I've seen her in. I know she was in like Mad Max or something, but wasn't she?
She was in Mad Max. She was in X-Men First Class. She was in some shit.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah, I've definitely seen her in stuff.
She really shined when she got to High Fidelity, though.
But she never stood out like she did in this movie, before for me. So she was one of my favorite characters. There was a lot of humor. I would not call this movie funny, but there are moments that had me just kind of chuckle inside of like, there's a little bit of humor, especially between the banter between Batman and Catwoman. I kind of really enjoyed their relationship, how it evolved, how she was involved to the plot. She wasn't just kind of these villains often can just be thrown in, and then for some reason they all have to connect with each other in this plot just because you need the villains to team up against Batman or something. But I felt like I really did like the screenplay, how it kind of kept her involved with all these different characters when she seems like a character that wouldn't really be integral. She's not. This movie deals with a lot of high-powered people in Gotham and corruption and things like that. And she's kind of a small player in that world, but integral to this whole story.
Her and Bruce Wayne in this movie rival that Bruce Wayne and Catwoman from Batman Returns, as far as just like great relationship, great on-screen presence together. Like, because she's the seductress. That's what she is. She's the seductress, and he is the night warrior, like, crime fighter, and he's always trying to push her like sexual tendencies away because he has to stay focused. And this is all comic book stuff, but even in the movies, that's still kind of present, And this movie does such a good job of like making it feel natural, like these two people would feel this way, and neither one of them really care who the other one is. She never even really cares who he is under the mask. She's like, "Hey, come away with me." It's like, well, what if I'm you don't know who I am? Like,
as I said, like maybe some of this movie as an action movie, which it isn't really trying to be first and foremost, didn't hit on all cylinders for me. Right. But I did like essentially the mystery. It's not the greatest mystery in terms of like, it always had me on the edge of my seat because we were constantly being given clues that were intriguing or whatever. But there was enough of it. Like it's not the greatest mystery, but there was enough of it to keep me going for 3 hours essentially. And its reveals along the way were pretty intriguing, pretty interesting, and pushing some boundaries of what we've seen other Batman iterations do. And that's what I did really appreciate.
And we haven't even talked about Andy Serkis yet, but you know what? We're not the only ones that cut him short. He's barely in the movie. He looks like he was going to be a great Alfred, but we just never got a chance to really see it.
I chalked up to this is one of the youngest Batmans we've seen, and he truly still does bring kind of a teen angst to the role.
He does.
And so I kind of chalked it up to a bit of that because I was wanting, honestly, we spoke before seeing the movie of like, what are some of the things we're excited about? And I had said, seeing Andy Serkis as Alfred was one of the characters I was most intrigued. And because he's barely in the movie, those few early scenes, I was a little annoyed at their combativeness.
And when we had that same discussion, I said one of my most anticipated things was Jeffrey Wright as, Lieutenant Gordon, and he did not disappoint. He was a huge part of this movie, and it was so cool. Sometimes they don't get along, and sometimes it's got that like bad cop, good cop thing. God, it's so hard because Gary Oldman was so goddamn great. I guess time will tell. You got to see a few more movies with this guy, but like Jeffrey Wright just nails it.
Moving on to probably one of the best villains in the film, because Catwoman's not really
let's face it, dude. Let's face it. One of the best character actors of our generation, who just doesn't get enough credit because he's a crazy party man, Irish guy, and he's good looking. But Colin Farrell's amazing.
He's a pretty great actor. He's
amazing.
He's had some wonderful roles. So Colin Farrell was the Penguin.
was he Pac-Man too?
I love the Danny or the Danny DeVito iteration of him. He's amazing, and that's what I'm basing a lot of my knowledge on. So maybe I've got the wrong view of it, but I still feel like they kind of captured the essence of who that was in this film without ever pushing any boundaries of like, he's got any penguin tendencies. He's got a bit of a long nose. That's about as far as it goes to push him into being an animal penguin.
There's one scene where it's very on the nose, and this doesn't give anything away, but there's a moment where he's handcuffed and tied up at the feet, and he's running like this, and he looks like a penguin, and that was clearly on purpose.
The makeup job on him, he's almost unrecognizable. His voice comes through a little bit, but he still kind of even works with that to disguise himself. And so he's a standout performance for me in the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'd even forgot that John Turturro was going to be playing Carmine Falcone in this movie. And boy, he just like with Christopher Walken as Max Schreck, he's kind of like the main villain who's not even advertised in like the trailers or the posters. Or you don't even know John Turturro is in this movie. And then when you watch it, you're like, spoilers, I guess. He's Carmine Falcone, and it's one of the biggest plot points of the movie.
The opening of the movie, I kind of turned to you and was like, "This is a very provocative opening." I was kind of hooked with that opening scene of like, where were we taking this, and were we going to go in such a dark direction right off the bat. And
The fact that Batman is narrating this movie gave me the biggest fucking chubby.
Oh, good for you. And how was it? I hope it was fucking good because it's useless now, isn't it? I'm gonna fucking kick your fucking ass.
That was Batman Year One. Or Batman was always doing that. He was always in the comic books. He was talking to you about that shit. And I thought Pattinson did such a great voiceover because most of his work is voiceover. Could you say that clearly 50% of Pattinson's Batman work was a stunt double? And that's fine. I mean, at least 50%. But I still think he did a fantastic job. And he's possibly my favorite on-screen Batman just because they nailed, not because of him per se, but because the lighting, the camera work, the way he was presented, and the outfits, all that stuff combined with when they do cut to Pattinson's face and eyes and it works so well for me. I would say that's my favorite. That's the Batman that I like.
he has one of the best Batman looks, but I still personally I wouldn't put him above Christian Bale as the iteration or the
Batman. See, Bale's not a great Batman though because he.
I said, where are the other drugs going?
Why are you talking like that?
This movie should have been what the follow-up to Batman Begins was. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, because he's still young, he's still learning. He's not being. It's a huge test. Don't get me wrong, but the Joker Batman test is supposed to be a long time coming. It's not supposed to be like I've been Batman for a year and now here's the Joker and now I'm not going to be Batman anymore. Like, this movie seemed like a better follow-up to Batman Begins, where if you saw him in year 2 and like now he's like, we use the bat signal as a way to just make people think I'm out there. And that's what scares them. Like, that's what I love about this movie is that, like, he says a line of dialogue where he's like, I can't be everywhere. That's what the bat signal's for. And they never, ever make mention of that's what the bat signal is in any other movie. They always make it seem like that's them calling Batman. It's telling criminals that he's out there.
Yeah, they've never really made that point in the other films, and it really, they've got in the old TV show. Didn't they have the bat phone? They actually called him on like the red.
Yeah, they called him on a red phone.
You need a fucking kick up the ass.
Naturally so.
And I love that he's just an auteur. He's a popcorn auteur that they're letting kind of just make the movie that he feels he needs to make. And there clearly doesn't look like there's too much politics or agenda and stuff in this movie. It looks like it was just a good Batman story fleshed out the way it was meant to be told by the person that wanted to adapt it and direct it. And I'm happy about that.
As much as I, appreciate Reeves as a filmmaker, I can't really say he's made a movie that I didn't appreciate and enjoy. Sometimes their pacing is a little bit slow, glacial, a little bit. The look of his films have often been dark. So I have some issues with him, but for the most part, I really enjoy his films and appreciate his films. Walking out of this movie, I wasn't like excited to see it again. And that's, for me, that's always the mark of like a best picture quality film. Or I was a little disappointed in this movie overall. But I appreciate it. It's a really well-made movie. It tells an interesting story. It has great versions of characters we've seen before. So there's a lot to like about it, but the overall feeling I had walking out of it was a little bit underwhelmed.
My biggest takeaway from this movie is I love the Batman that they gave us in this movie. I love the detective Batman. I don't really care that he wasn't much of a Bruce Wayne. I know that he's, we're still in the early stages. So if they decide to make sequels, which they will, he'll probably learn how to be that playboy guy. I just love that this movie was so much Batman. And when we talk about the villains being like, they're great. The Riddler was awesome. Penguin was really fun. They all were great, but the movie was about Batman. And, and that's what I wanted to see. As much as I love the Bale movies, after the first one, it's no longer about him. It just isn't. I love the aesthetic. I love most of the action, the fight choreography, stuff like that, the color. So I love this Batman that they gave us, but I don't know if it's my favorite Batman movie. That's where I'm kind of going to leave it.
Everybody, thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure you give us a comment down below. Tell us what you loved about the Batman. Alfred, riddle me this. Where can you find Cinema Gulp?
You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We drink your cinema.
I drink it up!